Our topic for today's event is Export First as a Growth Strategy. And during this panel discussion, we'll learn about what an export-led growth strategy looks like and what resources and tools you will need to be successful. First, it's my immense pleasure to introduce Supriya Devgan, the District Manager of the Western Region at EDC, and Theeparajah, Senior Account Manager at EDC, to say a few words and share a short presentation.
Thank you, Erica. Good morning, everyone. My name is Supriya Devgan. I am the District Manager for BC at Export Development Canada. It is truly our pleasure to sponsor this event, Export First as a Growth Strategy, together with BC Tech. Export Development Canada has a rich mandate to help Canadian companies succeed on the world stage. As international risk experts, we equip Canadian companies with the tools they need to grow their business. However, we understand taking a business to the next level can be challenging. Our sole purpose is to guide Canadian companies as they navigate the complexities of global markets. Their success is ultimately our success. We support Canadian companies of all sizes, industries, and sectors, companies with traditional exports, service-based exports, and companies selling into the global supply chain benefit from the services and support of EDC. Having said that, there are many ways we can support our technology companies: acquisitions, loan guarantees, working capital needs, supplier bonds, and much more. You will hear from Chris and Preston later in the program as to what exactly that support looks like. I would like to take a moment to thank our panelists for graciously giving up their time to be a part of this very important discussion. And I hope that their experiences, both challenges and successes, will give our audience valuable insight into the export journey and provide continuous learning to EDC to offer products better suited to the technology space. With that, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Chris Theeparajah, to take you through some of the content. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Supriya, and good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here with you this morning, and looking forward to delivering our presentation. If we can go to the second slide, please. Today, I'm just going to keep it high level, and over the next 15 to 20 minutes, speak briefly about our EDC's economic global outlook, and then give a few points and tips in terms of how to leverage your relationship with EDC as you continue to grow, whether that be access and credit, mitigating your risk through protecting your receivables, requiring support for bonds or letters of credit, and our general knowledge and information services. Next slide, please. So it's important to note that myself and my colleagues on the call today are not economists. However, this information was taken from our economic outlook delivered by our chief economist, Peter Hall. So this information is publicly available on our website. And if you wish to have a deeper dive, by all means, please do go to review it. A few things that did stand out are what I'm going to go over today, starting with the 2022 growth outlook. No surprise here, two of the world's largest economies continue to lead into 2022 and will have the most significant GDP growth. Looking in our neck of the woods in Canada and North America, we're on par with the rest of the developed world, maybe a little bit slightly behind the globe on average, but where we should be. Next slide, please. So with respect to this particular slide, this is referencing the global merchandise trade volumes over the last 14 years. And I just wanted to point out two major dips that you see on the presentation in 2008, 2009, when we had the financial crisis. And then things kind of recovered and flatlined for the next several years until 2020, when we started realizing the impact of the pandemic. However, earlier this year, we did see our trade volume start to increase and actually peak before starting to drop again. Now, ongoing transport bottlenecks and tightening labor conditions have really impacted the trade volumes we're seeing. And this incredible amount of pressure on the supply chains is where you're seeing now that dip start to fall, that peak start to fall again. However, we still are up 10% all in all. If we can go to the next slide, please. Coupled with that, incredible strain on supply chain is the cost of shipping containers and shipping in general. 2018 to 2020, again, relatively flatlined. However, the shipping industry has been trying to keep pace since the start of the pandemic. Rates for containers and port capacity have been extremely stretched, which is driving up the costs. And these bottlenecks will keep pricing pressures elevated for the next foreseeable future. Next slide, please. All in all, regardless of what's happening in the economy, the globe, the pandemic, things that are beyond our control, it's interesting to note that Canadian consumer confidence and business confidence has remained somewhat, or has gotten back to a position where it's somewhat high. Obviously, with, again, the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, a lot of questions were unknown. There was panic in the environment, and so that dipped. However, you can see that we start to recover quite nicely, and businesses and consumers themselves are starting to get back to what was normal. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about EDC itself. And again, this discussion is really high level, not meant to kind of get you thinking. So if there is a pain point that you think you may have, please engage with myself or Supriya or Wade, and we can have a discussion about that another time. But with EDC, there's a few ways that we can provide some value. Accessing credit could be one of them. We're not a lender, so we don't directly come to the table and provide that financing. However, we do work with your financial institution, all of the big 5 banks and HSBC in Canada, as well as some credit unions. And we have the ability to come in and really enhance their capabilities to lend you money as an exporter. And what that looks like is we'll provide them with a guarantee. Let's just say you're looking for some operating capital in the amount of $500,000. And for whatever reason, your bank may be a little bit challenged with getting across that finish line. They can call on us and we'll deliver a 50% guarantee or a 75% guarantee and give them a little bit more comfort in lending. That type of guarantee can be applicable to any type of lending structure aside from real estate. So it really is quite flexible. Protecting yourself against non-payment. When you start experiencing customers who are outside of Canada, there's a great element of risk depending on what market you're going into. We have the ability to come in and provide a risk mitigation tool that will give you peace of mind. Essentially, it's receivables insurance. So at the end of the day, should your foreign buyer not pay you through some sort of financial distress, you're going to know that you're going to have peace of mind and recover 90% of the cost of that receivable. This also allows you to become a little bit more competitive in the global market space, especially in today's day and age where competition is tight and the requirements from foreign buyers are starting to tighten up. This insurance will give you that ability to become more competitive. Okay, so the third bucket of area of support is supporting companies who require posting cash secured guarantees. Whether you're required to post a letter of credit or a letter of guarantee, typically a bank is going to require you to use cash collateral to securitize that. We have the ability to come in and replace that cash collateral at 100% with our guarantees. So therefore, it really doesn't put a strain on your working capital and allows you to execute on new opportunities. And finally, our knowledge and information services. We have a team of colleagues in Ottawa who are focused on providing extreme value to you as an exporting company with respect to your questions, whether that be market entry questions into the UK, IP protection questions, or anything and everything in between. At the end of the day, we have a team here to support you as you continue your exporting journey. So with that being said, that gives you a high-level overview of how we can provide some support. And again, I urge yourselves to engage with myself or with Wade to have a deeper discussion around how these solutions could be applicable to you and your business. Thanks so much, and over to you, Erica.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. And I think Zoom was catching up with all the great information you were sharing. So it definitely came through loud and clear. So thank you, Supriya. Thank you, Chris. Now, before we get started with our panel discussion, I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Wade Preston, Senior Account Manager at Export Development Canada.
So just to kick us off, the theme of today's session is really about export first as a growth strategy. So we have 4 different people here representing 4 different companies that have a whole bunch of different experiences as well. So I guess one of the first things that I'm really curious to hear a little bit about is each of your companies is focused on exporting and selling into global markets. I would just love to hear a little bit about why, and maybe if you could also throw in about how much of your sales to date are percentage-wise or export as well. Maybe we'll start with Ross, if we could.
Sure. Thanks, Wade. So just for some background, Greenlight Innovation makes test equipment for the alternative energy space. And for us, we got into exporting because really we're in a global market. So we sell to car companies around the world. And really the push for reduction of CO2 emissions is a global problem. So countries all over the world are doing research in energy storage and low emission transportation, and that's kind of where we sell our equipment into. And we're selling about 94% of our products overseas or outside of Canada. So that's kind of our ratio.
Great, thanks so much, Ross. And maybe I'll ask Eugen to chime in here and just give us a little bit about your export story and approximately what % your sales are that are export.
Yeah, thanks, Wade, and good morning, everyone. So just as a background, our company is a leader in delivering online enterprise resource management systems for the resource sector, like mining, oil and gas, water, e-permitting, and so on. And over the last 20 years, we deployed these systems, starting with Canada and most of the Canadian jurisdictions. So as a number of countries around the world, including Latin America, Africa, Asia, have undertaken resource sector reforms that support transparent, sustainable management of their natural resources. It was a logical step for us to take our Canadian experience and implement in other countries. Also, another reason for us is that most of the countries around the world are in developing an early stage of digital transformation maturity, and that's probably about 15%. So I think helping them with digital transformation, especially in the resource sector, which is probably behind the 15% overall in terms of digital transformation, that's another reason for us to go to the international market.
Huge opportunities there for sure. Lindsay, could you give us a little bit of a background on Geocomply and tell us a little bit about your export journey there?
Yeah, so Geocomply has been around for about a decade. We're a cybersecurity specialist company that has primarily focused on geolocation technology up to this point. In terms of our export business as a portion of all of our business, I'd say it's essentially 100%. The founding of our company came to be by focusing on a niche market, which was the US casino gaming industry. So our technology was designed specifically for a use case there, and in turn, all of the markets and the clients that we service have grown out of that use case. So while it's global, it's very American at the moment. That being said, we do see some changes that are probably coming in the next 12 months where we will see a small portion of business happening here at home in Canada.
Excellent, and definitely a highly regulated world that you're in there as well. So looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that too. And we'll have our final panelist here, Mark Radford. If you could just tell us a little bit about your export strategy, a little bit about why, and maybe the % of your export sales right now.
Sure, thanks, Wade. Yeah, so LMI produces machine vision sensors and systems for quality inspection, automation, and optimization. And we really primarily focus on 3D machine vision systems. And we actually trace our roots back about 40 years right here to BC, and we're focused on producing automation and optimization solutions for the lumber industry. And then as we grew, we looked to take our technology into similar manufacturing environments and find new markets. And those markets were largely overseas where products were being produced. So we're now at a point where nearly 95% of our revenue comes from overseas. Or at least outside of Canada, I should say, not necessarily overseas. And so really we focused on where those markets lie and where there are very high volume, high production environments. And that tends to be a lot in Asia. And that's where our fastest growth is happening right now.
Excellent. And Lindsay, you touched on this earlier, so I'd like to start with you for the next question here. So we have heard from other Canadian companies that it can be more challenging to make a sale in Canada than in some export markets. You're kind of currently going through this right now, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I would say so. Gaming or gambling industry that we're focused upon is very highly regulated, very dependent on changing legislation, and that's definitely the case in Canada. For example, single event sports betting was legalized in Canada just a handful of months ago. So the potential for business opportunities for a company like Geocomply is very dependent on political changes. So that's one big dependency that will fuel our growth not only in Canada but beyond Canada's borders as well. And it's been a challenge, but luckily we're often at the forefront of those regulatory changes and are well positioned to take advantage of those opportunities.
Great. And Mark, I'd love to hear your background from an LMI perspective on how Canada is in respect to doing business here as opposed to some of the export markets that you work in.
On you. The challenge with Canada is that there's a lot of small companies in Canada, and as much as we do have bigger corporations, they don't necessarily align with every industry depending on where you're focused. So in the manufacturing space, we're really focused on very, very high volume, high production rates, and that kind of forced us to once we'd saturated a couple markets here, we wanted to go overseas, and really there, the Canadian brand, Canadian technology was really well received, and we were able to grow from there.
Great. And Ross, your experience from the same, obviously a lot of your customers, the demand is not in Canada, but love to hear your take on how easy it is to do business in Canada or how hard as compared to some of your export markets. Our
Yeah, as you point out, Canada for us is not that big a market, primarily because we don't have a big automotive industry here. Our big markets tend to be Germany, China, Korea, markets like that, and the US. So for us, we think that Canada has a very good reputation, though, globally for quality and technology. So I think that actually benefits us selling into other countries, because our reputation is so good, and we have a high skill set here of knowledge workers. So I think we can leverage our reputation as Canadians.
Waving that flag hard, as I said before, so that's great. And Eugen, you've kind of just alluded to this a little bit in the first question that we asked here, but your take on how hard it is to do business in Canada as opposed to your export markets. And you're on mute. Sorry, Eugen.
Sorry. Yeah, so for us, because our main clients are governments, I mean, I find it actually easier in Canada than around the world. It's not because they are not open for business. I think they would like to sign a deal next day, but in many cases, they are dependent on external factors like external funding, World Bank, IDB. Other factors are legislation, as Lindsay said, or elections, especially election cycles, because governments usually they don't hire before an election or just after the election. Their state of digital transformation maturity. So all these factors need to be taken into account. So that's why sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's hard. It really depends on the government where they are in these cycles.
No, definitely makes sense. And while we have you here, maybe we'll start a third question with you as well. what export markets for you do you think are most open to doing business with BC-based companies?
Right. So I think generally, as Ross said, I think Canadian companies are very well received when you go and do a presentation. I mean, they kind of look up to the legislative frameworks in our case for governments or even systems that we're implementing in Canada. So there is a level of trust that you're already starting at a certain level. So I find that most of the countries are kind of open to BC or Canadian companies. For us, because most active in Latin America, I find that most of the Latin America is very open to do business with BC companies.
Excellent. And Ross, you mentioned a little bit earlier about this as well too, but your perspective on what markets you think are most open to doing business with BC-based companies?
Sure. Well, I mean, the most obvious one is the USA. I mean, just geographically and culturally, it makes the most sense for for people to get into initially. But I mean, we find China to be a very good market. It can be maybe a bit intimidating at first because it's so big, but once you have an entry point, we find that the Chinese business is very entrepreneurial, very fast acting, and very willing to do business with Canadian companies.
Really interesting perspective, because we often hear that it can be a really difficult market to do business in. So would love to get more of your thoughts around that. And I'm sure a lot of people in the audience would as well too. So Mark, maybe tell us a little bit about what your perspective is on some export markets that are most open to doing business with BC.
Yeah, I think a number of good points have been raised already. I think obviously with the USA, we share time zones, we share, a common language, we share a lot of cultural elements, and that makes it very easy to approach and do business with those companies. I think Ross's point on China is excellent. I mean, they move so fast that it's really easy to find new accounts and start doing business and rapidly grow that business there, but it is a bit more challenging. I think really in the context of, this webinar, or this session today being hosted by BC Tech, I think really when you're trying to sell a technology product into emerging markets, you also have, a strong advantage, right? You can really take that as being from a leading company in a leading country and leverage that to be successful as well. So it does depend a little bit, but every market, every geography sort of has different things that are important to them, and you just have to really learn and understand what those factors are in order to be successful.
Well said. And Lindsay, we've heard that China can be a really open market for doing business, and Latin America as well. But tell us a little bit about Geocomply and what your perspective on this would be.
I mean, to mirror the sentiments that have already been shared, yes, obviously, America, and that's a focus for our company. But I think it's worth mentioning, at least for Geocomply as a BC company, our ability to deliver export products has been highly dependent on where we can find talent, both within BC, but also internationally. For us, it's having a large pool of talented technical specialists. And for our company, at least, we found that in Vietnam and the Ukraine, which, I mean, Geocomply would not exist without the local presence that we have there and the talents that we've drawn upon.
Incredible. And I think that you've touched on a very important issue that a lot of people in this audience are probably seeing as well too, is that talent gap and the talent pool here locally, right? And again, haven't seen any questions come into the chat. Don't be scared. Would love to hear any of your thoughts, any of your questions that come in. So please shoot them our way. One of the things I just wanted to ask, because we've touched on it a little bit here, but just wanted to go a little bit deeper, was for each of you, what was the most important support that you've gotten along the way through your export journey? And just tell us a little bit more about that. If we could have maybe Ross start us off there.
Sure. Well, we've had some pretty good success working with the trade commissioners, the federal trade commissioners around the world. and they can help with things like translation, helping you line up with translation services. They can do due diligence on potential partners or customers. They can make introductions. So they've been very useful, and as well as our local BC Trade and Invest offices. They have representatives around the world too. So they've been helpful. And then I'll just give a plug to EDC here, as we've been working with EDC now for, going on 12 years. And using a lot of the services that Chris highlighted before in terms of receivable insurance, project financing, support for bonding and so forth. So they've kind of been a silent partner with us all these years, and they've really helped us, getting our lines of credit secured with the banks and so forth. So definitely that's something people would want to look at.
No, that's great to hear. Thanks for the plug there, and great to have you as a customer and all the great things that GeoLi is doing as well too. Same question, maybe we'll kick it over to Mark for this one.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the same points. I think the other thing is just to get into various markets, there's certain complexities that might not be immediately obvious in terms of how you do business. Particularly if you are selling physical products and what the import regulations are and duties and taxes and things like that. And having a local team that can help, I want to say add clarity to the otherwise mountains of paperwork that you're sort of faced with going through, and having a little bit of real world experience in terms of dealing with that market or that country. I think that's really always very helpful, where you can connect with someone that's an expert in that market, and basically start having a high level conversation, say, okay, here are the potential barriers and challenges, and this is how that needs to be addressed. And again, it can be very different in different markets, but just having someone that you can talk to or connect with other companies that have been working in that market and learn lessons the easy way rather than kind of having to struggle by yourselves. So I think that's the one area where we've really benefited from these connections. I think the second is really as well, just in terms of introductions to key companies or to key customers, right? When there are sort of trade missions or similar events that happen, and you're able to get in front of senior people or decision makers at big companies, it can make all the difference in the world just to have that door open, just a crack that you can start coming in and connecting with someone, right? To go overseas and to try and work your way into a big automaker or someone like that can be really difficult and really challenging. And so any support along the way to help that conversation move along and accelerate is greatly appreciated. And again, I think, between EDC, between the BC government and their export offices, that there is a lot of support in Canada for these sorts of programs. And I really highly encourage everyone to take advantage of it.
That's great. And one of the big things I pulled out of there is peer group, having a peer group that's been there and done that before too. So I know that BC Tech has a bunch of different great resources for connecting you to other companies as well too, and use the power of the crowd, right? I'm seeing some questions come into the chat, which is great here. So maybe we'll pass it over to Lindsay to just talk a little bit about important support along the way, and then I'm gonna grab a couple of these questions that you submitted in for next here.
Yeah, I mean, well, Geocomply grew our destiny within a niche market that we knew, like the executive team had a lot of expertise and experience in, and that's kind of how we got our foot into the door. That being said, I think a lot of the industry associations that we are either a member to that could be more on a national scale or even global scale, and our industry partners have really taken us a long way. So some things that we've done from early on are look around and find some partners within our industry that we're not competing with, but we have common goals and common clients, and to do everything from marketing campaigns and collaboration to I guess ingrain ourselves with one another and our clients and increase our presence and essentially establish ourselves as thought leaders within the industry. So we're not just talking about the products and services that we're selling, but really how we position ourselves in the industry or industries we're serving.
Great, well said. And Eugen, I'm going to put you on the spot with our first question from the audience here. So this is from Raphael. Thanks for the question, Raphael. How do you cope with different rules, regulations, currencies in different markets? What was complicated? So a bit of a big question there, but take a piece of it or all of it if you can.
Yep, no problem. So yes, there are a couple of challenges when you go into a foreign market, but as everybody mentioned here, there are a couple of government agencies that actually can help in that process. So one is the Trade Commissioner. They usually have somebody on the ground in each major domain, and they can put you in contact with government clients if that's your market or private, or find local partners, legal firms. And I think legal firms are pretty much a must in all the countries. You probably have to have some agreements that are revised, translations, and so on. So that's on the Trade Commissioner side. And then regarding the money transfer, yes, you have to be prepared to have accounts in different currencies to facilitate that transfer. And another thing that is usually required, they have some type of contract insurance, which usually is not covered by the Canadian insurance. So that was one thing that was very clear to us. So you have to find the local insurance, but in some cases, if you are new on the market in that country, it's hard to get that local insurance. So that's where EDC came into place. It was very useful because they can secure the line of credit through your bank, and will make it easier to not freeze that capital. So yeah, those are the areas that you can get some help and kind of help through the process.
That's a great overview there. And just to touch on the first part of that question around rules and regulations in different markets. So EDC has an entire division that's for this, called our Export Help, which is complementary.
I think it's a great question, and it's definitely very relevant to anyone that's producing physical goods right now. Is the supply of everything seems to be disrupted, and I mean, there's a lot of theories out there. There's some hard numbers. You know, much of it kind of feels like the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. There is a lot of panic buying happening in the market where you just can't seem to get things that should, you know, readily be available. And I think it's affecting many companies in different ways. Obviously, you know, our products consist of everything from, different types of metal, copper in our cables, aluminum in our sensor housings, different types of glass in our optics, and then of course, lots of semiconductors in our electronics. And all of these have seen supply chain disruptions, lead time increases, and even in some cases, you know, parts going on to allocation. So I think, you know, when I read the headlines in terms of what's happening to companies like Apple delivering phones, or VW and Toyota, you know, producing cars, you know, I actually feel like we're doing pretty well compared to many of those other companies. But a lot of it really comes back to in Chris's intro presentation, right? He showed this huge spike in kind of consumer goods demand, or just general goods demand, that happened. And it was right around that time that all of the commodities went crazy, whether you were looking at copper or aluminum, or, you know, starting to see the effect in semiconductors. Everyone realized that the growth was happening a lot faster than anyone anticipated. Everyone was struggling to buy materials, and, you know, the world hasn't caught up yet, right? So again, to kind of go back to the early 2020 and the toilet paper shortage, all of the toilet paper is gone from the shelves, and now, you know, we're waiting for it to be restocked. And this really then builds onto the other challenges we see in the world. I mean, obviously, there's a shortage of container traffic. All of the ports are clogged around the world. You know, different factories are still shut down due to COVID, particularly in Southeast Asia. Ports are shut in China and Asia due to COVID. Ports are backed up on the west coast of the US. And then it's causing additional problems like getting coal into China to generate power to keep factories running, and now factories are shutting down there. So there's all of these different things that are somewhat related, but all fundamentally come back to the combination of, you know, either direct impacts due to COVID shutdowns, or, you know, the indirect, you know, spike in demand after the recovery. So I think that we're going to start seeing things settle down a little bit over the next few months. And I'm really optimistic that in some cases, many of these challenges will have sort of disappeared by the time we get into the new year.
No, it's a great overview, and yeah, hopefully people aren't hoarding resources like chips like they were toilet paper back in March 2020 there. But again, I think Ross, I would love to have your thoughts on this same question here as well too.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's not too much I could add to what Mark's good overview there, but I will say that this is starting to hit us. I'd say we've done pretty well up until just recently, but we are seeing shortages in electronic components and semiconductors that go into our products. And we are now having to look for mitigation strategies and substitutions. And I've told my guys to look for, alternative supplies or alternative solutions for the next 6 to 12 months. So that's kind of what we're forecasting. But I agree with Mark. I think this is going to return to normal. As you can buy toilet paper now, I think we'll be able to get semiconductors in a year from now, if not sooner. But yeah, it is a challenge, and it's driving up costs as well, which is problematic. But I think that may be temporary as well.
And I think that's well answered there. But Lindsay or Eugen, if you'd have anything to add, love to hear your thoughts. If not,
actually, I don't have much to add. Actually,
yeah, go.
I see the impact on say companies that kind of have import export of components and so on. But because we are more in the IT consulting, actually, COVID has some good and bad parts. The good one is that before, in some countries, like face-to-face was a must, like you have to meet in person to go to the next step, versus right now, everybody is used to the remote work, remote conference. So, we found some positives in that area.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Geocomply has the luxury of not distributing, solid products that you hold in your hand whatsoever. So supply chain struggles have been something we've been able to shrug our shoulders at and move on. Our company more than doubled in size during COVID, but now we're trying to reestablish ourselves to kind of the new normal. Here we've hired all these people, and we're trying to figure out how to even physically bring them back to the office. We can't find an office space to renovate to fit all of the people. So apart from stacking people up on bunk beds in the office, we feel like our continued growth is stifled because of things like supply chain. It's an odd predicament, huh?
Well, I would definitely love to, with a view like you have from your office there, I'd definitely love to get back there. So, but I'd like to just spend a little bit of time on our final question here, because we're getting close to time, and I really wanted to touch on this. And it's around advice that you may give other companies from your experience, especially as it relates to exporting there. So maybe we'll start with Mark on that one.
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that I think is very relevant. I really look at the world as being such a big place. There's so many markets, there's so many countries, there's so many companies in it. So my advice to anyone is to stay focused, really understand what it is that you do best, what your target markets are, and be really, really specific in terms of who you're trying to go after, both in terms of geographies, companies, etc. And really try to be strong in that space, right? Define your target market to the point where you say, okay, our goal is to get 20 or 30 or even 40% of this very, very target market. And maybe it's only 50 or $100 million, but have that as your goal, rather than saying there's $1 billion or $5 billion market out there in the world. We're just going to go out and get 1% of it, right? Because that lack of focus will sort of drive you nuts. So, really spend the time understanding where it is you want to go, create focus, and then go after, those little niche markets that you can. I think that's the best way to have sustainable growth through an export strategy.
No, that's great. Being surgical with your market. That's great advice. And Lindsay, some advice that you may give another company as it relates to export.
Well, I think Mark's explanation just now of picking that specialty to focus on, it's definitely something I can identify with Geocomply having like all of our eggs initially in one market, a niche market. We're looking to grow within that opportunity, but also find new ones, expand to new verticals. And we've had exactly that problem where it's like you need to figure out that laser focus to decide where you're really going to go and what's the probability of your success in one new vertical versus just spreading yourself thin. So that's a challenge we're still trying to unpack. But the one that we do have under our belts, as I've mentioned, is we found a specialty in a very insular industry. We knew it well. We owned it more. We mastered it in a particular place that was experiencing exponential legislative change, political change, and took advantage of every opportunity as it unfolded, and it's still unfolding. So that's definitely driving our base of success and will allow us to expand our business into other areas.
And I just want to pull on that thread just a little bit more. Advice, if you are in a highly regulated environment like you are with gaming, just a little advice around that and how you've navigated that. Maybe we could probably spend a week talking about this, but maybe a couple things that maybe just come to top of mind there.
Yeah, I think when you're in a really highly regulated market, every single thing you do, every person that you hire, the way that you structure your company, the way that you conduct all of your business literally has to revolve around being licensed and vetted in this very particular way that rules your life. So long as you have a team dedicated to how this rules your life, to keep a constant pulse on it, then you can stay ahead of the game. And rather than rule you in a bad way, you can create lots of opportunities around that. That being said, it really limits who your partners are. Your standard global brands or household names, they typically don't muddle in gaming because they would never want to go through that complicated licensing and vetting process. So in turn, it makes that market very, very insular. But we have, government affairs team, a robust legal and regulatory team that includes full-time staff within our company that service, multiple jurisdictions, but also, local consultants that will collaborate with that may know particulars in specific markets more than us, such as, licensing attorneys or other market specialists. So that would be my advice if you need to tackle that hurdle, and love to chat with anyone that wants to know more.
I don't think there'd be anybody better than you to give that overview too. So that sounds like a big bite there. But we'll pass it over to Eugen. A little advice that you may give some of the crowd here that you learned along your export journey.
Right. So I have a couple of suggestions. So first is research your market. I mean, companies often underestimate the degree of competition in the new markets, right? So you have to determine how your product is different and what is your unique value proposition. Because coming from another country, obviously you have to be well and above what the local market can offer. So that's one. And then choose how you enter the market, because depending on the type of product, maybe you need an in-country distributor, or you need to partner with a local business, or you need to open an office and so on. So those are the two important aspects when you go to a new market.
Excellent. And again, we have the chat open here, and hopefully we have a couple questions that come in. I did see one from my boss, which I should probably address, but I do want to hear Ross's thoughts first. Advice that you'd give the audience here today about what you learned.
Sure. Well, yeah, adding to what Eugen just said, I think you need to understand the market that you're going into quite well before you make any investments there. Knowing that not all markets are the same, and knowing that your products and services may need to be adopted to that specific market is important. So one of the strategies that Greenlight has used successfully is partnering with distributors and service reps in these different geographic regions As a small company, it's pretty expensive. It's a big commitment to set an office up in some other foreign jurisdictions. So finding a business partner is really helpful. And we've used the trade commissioners groups to help us locate some partners and do due diligence on them. So a couple of suggestions there.
Great. And again, my shameless plug, hopefully I don't get pulled off here again, but we do have the contact for the Trade Commission service and that takeaway deck as well that you'll have access to, so you can reach out to them. And maybe we'll open this up. I'm going to take a little bit of a spin on Supriya's question. So I guess looking back, maybe a brief cautionary tale of something that you wish that you'd known before you'd gone into a market or gotten into a relationship with a customer or something along those lines.
For us, what was new, more about the insurance requirements. So we expected that the Canadian insurance would work in those international markets. They usually don't. So something to be prepared to deal with the local insurance, and that's where EDC could help in that area.
Perfect. Yeah. Anybody else? Mark, you've had to get in some lumps along the way. What can you share?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it goes back to my earlier comment of having someone you can talk to or partners in that region that can tell you a little bit about really how things are done, right? Because sometimes what's on paper isn't the reality, right? I mean, I think payment terms in China are something that, come to mind, right? Where, it might say net 45 on the contract, but that really means we'll pay you when we then want our next order to ship, or we'll pay you, but then we're going to hold back 5%, or, something like that, right? And there's all of these practices that are fairly commonplace in regions that you won't necessarily find out about by, just looking at the contracts or reading the literature. So, I think to build on that, I think it's a bit of a theme of the session now that I reflect on it. Don't be afraid to ask for help. There's fantastic resources out there. There's lots of people that are engaged in this, and create partnerships, ask for advice, and reach out for support. You'll be more successful, and you'll stumble less along the way, I think, ultimately.
Maybe Lindsay, would you leave us maybe with any parting words about anything that you wish that you would have known when you started?
I feel like maybe not when something necessarily goes wrong, but once you have made some sort of a stride into a new market and you look back and think, what could I have done better? And I find for us, we will, if we've lacked in any way, maybe it's actually preparedness on the marketing, public relations front. Again, we often try to position ourselves as thought leaders in our industry, and I feel like if we get a little bit complacent and don't remind ourselves of that, we kind of miss out in the conversation that's happening around us and the opportunities in that market as it rolls out. So I would encourage people to have that top of mind. Don't lose sight of it.
Oh, definitely well said there. And I know we're getting close to the end of the session here, so I just wanted to thank everybody very much for being on the panel. Great to chat with all you. This has been really fun too, so enjoyed it. And to BC Tech as well for hosting the event. We're a newer partner with BC Tech and looking forward to working with all of you more. So I'm going to pass it back to Erica here, but thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. It was a fantastic conversation, and I think really hearing about your journeys, that's what these sessions are about, is sharing stories and what works.